I never wanted what other people wanted. I always wanted kind of the opposite, if anything, almost maybe on purpose. Everyone used to say, how can you cut it open? And I always used to just think, well, why wouldn't you want to skin an animal? Like, why wouldn't you want to see what was underneath the skin? Everyone in our lives has been through this building. And we've rented it out for shoots as well. We had baby reindeer. Some of that was filmed here. I wanted to sort of accumulate these things. None of those things are very important, and all that's important is the people in your life. It's just family. I mean, as long as I can take those three along with me, I think I could make a nice home anywhere.
Hi, Polly.
Hi.
Thanks so much for inviting us in here, and thanks for the tour. You grew up in the Cotswolds, I think, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
What was home like there?
It was a fairly functioning household. I had two older sisters, my mum and my dad. And my dad variously worked with animals. Like, he was always sort of setting up businesses with different animals. He'd gone to Cirencester Agricultural College. And when I was born, I think he was working artificially inseminating cattle for some company. And then I think he was made redundant from that, and he then decided to sort of start up his own businesses. And there was all sorts of things that he did at that point. And I felt I'm probably getting it all wrong, and I could sort of hear him shouting, "No, it wasn't that." But there was something to do with Angora goats, because we had about 200 Angora goats for a while. But we didn't live on a farm. We lived on a very normal, just a house in a village. So he would rent the odd field from local farmers for the goats. So they were always kind of nearby, but not quite, on our property. But then if any of them got sick, they would kind of move in with us. So they were often there would be baby goats in the dog beds. I remember sometimes coming home to that. We had a really old, sick goat that we kind of adopted that was often tethered to a tree outside. Then he moved into, I think during the BSE crisis, he thought there was this kind of belief that maybe ostrich meat was going to take over from beef when beef became a less viable option. So he invested in a pair of ostriches, but they didn't live near us. I think they were about to move it near, and then one of them died, and then that all went tits up because they didn't breed. He had llamas, and they were up the road in a little hamlet called Kitebrook, and I just remember riding. I just remember being in fields a lot, like various fields, herding goats, and generally being sort of like my dad frustratedly yelling at me to like stop something from escaping, or being spat at by llamas. We had llamas. It's like a weird mishmash of memories. And it was kind of fun and eccentric, I guess. And I had a lot of freedom. We were in a village, and we just used to go out and play, quite old-fashioned, I suppose. We'd just go, and then we'd come back at supper time, and we'd make dams in the streams. There was a farmer who had a load of hay bales that we used to make these amazing dens in, but he was always threatening us. So then we'd kind of go and find another place to build the dens. Climbing trees, it was quite. It was not a bad childhood. It definitely instilled a real love of nature and the countryside, which is ironic because my whole teenage years, I just remember spending desperate to get out of there and move to a city.
Always the way, isn't it?
Exactly. That's just being a teenager, I guess.
It's always the way, and then you come full circle and go back again, I find. But
and then you live in the city and you're in the country. Yeah, never happy.
But obviously, the flip side of having animals around is death, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in the context of your work, you must have got quite used to the idea of handling dead stuff. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, very, very used to that. Yes, because I used to breed hamsters as well. I don't know if it was intentional or it was just. I think it started because we accidentally got a male and we already had a female, and then they started breeding, and then. My mum just had so many other preoccupations. She had 3 jobs, and she was always having to help out with the animals as well. And she probably didn't even notice that my bedroom was suddenly overrun with hamsters. And then the cat used to break in. And we had 2 cats, which was not, a great marriage, hamsters and cats. So the cats would always break in and mutilate 1 or 2 of them. We'd find them we'd shut the door and we did our best to protect the hamsters, but somehow the cat would get around it. And I remember at one point there was 19 of them and we didn't have space, so they all went in the bath for a while. Empty bath, obviously no water in it. But we had to put the plug in the bath and there was lots of little hamsters running around in the bath until my dad was trying to kind of knock up some sort of hutch for them in the garage. So yeah, they would die. I remember getting quite used to just scooping up a dead hamster off my floor. And then I remember a really quite a vivid memory of mine when I must have been about 7 or 8 was when a goat died. My dad he wasn't a vet. He very definitely wasn't a vet, but he was convinced that he knew what was wrong and, you know, how to treat the animals. And one of his best friends was a vet, and they were always sort of having little arguments with each other because the vet would turn up and say, "Why do you keep taking things into your own hands?" And I remember my dad dissecting a goat that had died to try and find out what was wrong with it. So kind of a little autopsy just in the backyard. And I just remember him cutting the stomach open and all this grass spilling out of the stomach and just being fascinated and thinking, so that's where it goes. They're eating the grass and it's now inside there. And then so there was a kind of interest in biology and anatomy, but for me, it was always a lot more visceral and physical. And I think the problem that I had at school was science was taught in a very boring kind of way where we didn't do any experiments or anything. I remember being really jealous that a friend of mine went to a school where they cut up a frog and an eyeball and like pleading with my teacher to let us do that, and she didn't. So I had no interest really in science because it was all very much like, you know, just things written on a blackboard. But it was there. And I used to have to drive the dead goats to an abattoir as well. They were already dead, but they would go to this abattoir because that's where they used to process the meat, and it was made into dog food, I think. But they were often like bloated and smelly by the time they were put in the car, and we would take them. I just remember all the windows open and my head out like that just because the smell was so bad. So yeah, after that, it really, I remember I was 23 when I started doing taxidermy, and everyone used to say, how can you cut it open? And that just was never a thing for me. It was really, and also because the animals have to be fresh. So I think the really disgusting thing is bad smells or maggots. Those are the things that we tend to recoil from. And mostly you would never skin or try to work with an animal that was rotten because it wouldn't work. All the feather or the fur would fall out. So yeah, I always used to just think, well, why wouldn't you want to skin an animal? Like, why wouldn't you want to see what was underneath the skin? It's fascinating. The skin is only about 5 or 10, I can't remember the exact percentage. It's under 10%, I think, of our body is our skin. So there is so much more that we don't know about unless we've done medical training. None of us are ever going to see that. Didn't
your mum find a scene of carnage with the chickens one day?
Oh yeah, we had chickens as well. We had so many animals. I mean, I was telling someone the other day who had chickens, and I said, yeah, we used to have 19 chickens. She was like, 19 chickens? Why do you have 19? I was like, I don't know. Because we didn't have a very big garden, yeah, but I think we had 19 chickens. I just remember that there was 19 headless chickens in the morning because somehow, I think the fox had basically broken open the hen coop and they'd all tried to escape, and that's what they do. They just decapitate them all, and then they only take one.
Is that right?
Yeah, they kill, but then they can only obviously carry one back with them, so they just left all the dead bodies. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What was your bedroom like? Did you spend much time in your room? Was that a thing?
Yeah, I did spend quite a lot of time in my room. I liked my room. I quite liked my own company. I mean, when I was really young, I remember I would just like make magazines and I would draw pictures of animals and write little things about, like, I'd go out with my sister Emily, and we'd have this sort of like little nature club that we'd do together where we'd go and dip pond water and draw tadpoles and, you know, quite kind of virtuous sort of nature stuff. And like collect leaves, and so that I do remember that for a while, and climbing the trees and bringing all of that stuff back, and writing poetry. I used to write a lot of poems about the trees and things. I mean, that's the thing, when you're kind of bored, you do get really creative, and I try not to cave in when my kids say they're bored now, because I remember all of that. I just remember how bored I was a lot of the time, and then I'd sit and I'd be really bored, and then I'd think, well, no one's going to fix this, so then you'd start to do something, and that's always when the most interesting work used to come, I think. But when I was a teenager, it was just like, I think I had a red wall, and I had a kind of weird, I had a chair that my dad made me. I remember seeing some sort of catalogue came through the door. God knows what it was, but anyway, it had a chair in it, a really weird looking chair with a very high back and like one really narrow arm, one really fat arm. I mean, I was always quite interested in design and things being a bit kind of different. I do remember I never wanted what other people wanted. I always wanted kind of the opposite, if anything, almost maybe on purpose, because I thought, well, if everyone is into that, then I'm going to be into this thing instead, because that's going to be more interesting, or I'll stand out, or whatever it might be. I don't know. But I would always kind of be drawn to the things that people weren't so interested in. And it was such a weird, quite ugly chair, actually, and it had all these like swirly patterns and colours on it. And I just really wanted this chair. And I remember my mum and dad saying, well, you don't need a chair, and it's £100 and we're not buying you a chair. And then my dad very sweetly went off and made me this chair. He just like looked at it and he kind of cobbled it together out of bits of wood and presented it to me. So I remember lying on the kitchen floor, like when I get back from school, I decided to make it black and white checked, but tiny little squares, only the size of like those little bathroom tiles. And I just remember like painstakingly drawing out the line. It was enormous. It had the back was like up to here. And then just like getting these little, my mum bought me some Humbrol paints and I would just paint black and white, black and white, and black and white squares. And I did finish it in the end. And I had it here in the basement. I kept it right up until here because I couldn't bring myself to throw that out. And I did. And actually my friend, when we moved out of here, I had so much stuff, had to go to the tip. And my friend filmed me chucking it off into the skip. Because I was a bit like, oh, this chair, this is one thing I feel weird about chucking, but I chucked it.
How do you feel about that now?
Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. I've got rid of so many things. I think it's fine.
Yeah. So you're the youngest of three, is that right?
Yeah.
So what sort of character were you in that three? I mean, how would you describe that dynamic?
I think I was always the moderator. So, and I think actually it's quite a classic thing with three kids. Like, you know, the first and the second. I don't know if the first and the second always have difficulties. Maybe it's when the third one comes along and they start to have difficulties. I'm not sure. Like, I have two. And they're really different. They're like, one's here and the other's like on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, which seems to be the case with most people I speak to who have two children. They will say this. But I think actually there's no coincidence. I was thinking maybe it's an evolutionary thing. You know, maybe we have to be very different in order for our parents to look, you know, resources are finite, right? So you have to like different things and you have to fill different gaps in the market, I think. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the first two are always so different. And that was exactly my eldest. I think they were very different. One looked more like one parent, one looked more like the other parent. I looked like right in between. I looked like both sisters. I'm the kind of, I think I link the two of them together in a way. I think my mum said I was just really chilled out. And I think you have to be when you come in that late. For a start, people aren't really fussing over you the way they are with the older children. You kind of get ignored. There was no photos of me or anything. I thought I was adopted for years. Because my mum said, I know, but by the time you came along, we were sort of over it by then. We weren't taking pictures of you. We were so excited when Sophie arrived, and there's like these little baby books with pictures of her in, and then slightly smaller a baby book for Emily, and then no baby book for me.
And so you hear that a lot there, don't you? Yeah. There's a sort of flick book of the first one's entire life.
I get it. I'm the same, though. You do.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting you say that about the dynamics. It made me think of there's a sort of slightly niche branch of psychology called family constellation therapy.
Yeah. Okay.
And the idea is that a family or a group of people is a constellation, and, you know, everyone sort of fits together in a slightly dysfunctional way, but it kind of works. In my case, I've got three daughters, and we had one, and then we had identical twins second time around. So
wow,
that
must
dynamic,
be a whole new dynamic.
Well, exactly. It's quite a complicated system, but it's sort of, you know, they kind of make it work between them. And
do the twins gang up on the other one a bit?
No, what happens is our eldest pairs off with one of the twins.
That's just what happened with us, though, actually.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the constant pairing and leaving one. Off. Yeah, but the pairs change.
Yeah.
But there's always one slightly. Yeah, we definitely had that. I would think I was used as a sort of pawn to play off each other quite a lot with my eldest.
Because you were the most biddable and easygoing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have that. So I get the impression you had quite a lot of energy, though. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think I was creative. I definitely had quite a creative way of looking, and I just don't think I did the obvious thing or came up with necessarily the obvious solution. And like I say, I think a lot of it came down to just being quite bored. I do think if I'd grown up now, I worry about this a lot with this, you know, the whole screen thing and everything. When you've just got something constantly, if you're bored, you just do that. You pick up your phone and look at it, and I can feel. I mean, I can really feel it sapping my creativity now when I do that. And I know that if I go and put my phone in another room and shut the door and just sit for like 15 minutes, which feels like quite a long time when you're so addicted to a phone, I will start to have full thought, you know, that have some sort of like trajectory that go somewhere, and I'm not constantly interrupting myself with things. And you don't know it at the time, but it was a real privilege, I guess, to be growing up in the countryside and without those distractions. And I wasn't really mollycoddled because my mum was too busy to, you know, she was always working, and so I just I had a lot of independence and freedom, and my mum was very good at not, all she really cared about was that, you know, if we were happy. She just had no real kind of ambitions for us in a funny way, which sometimes I thought was a bit odd, but then I also think it was good. It gave us an awful lot of kind of freedom to explore and not worry about failing and messing stuff up.
If you're enjoying this episode and are curious to see inside Polly Morgan's home, we're sharing an exclusive house tour over on Patreon. Polly shows us her art collection, including gifts from artists like Damien Hirst and Dinos Chapman, and some of her own taxidermy pieces. And she takes us down into her studio in the cellar, where she spent many afternoons peeling the skins off snakes. Head to patreon.com/homingwithmatt to take a look. You left the Cotswolds to go to London, didn't you, to study?
Yeah.
What did you study?
I studied English. I didn't study art. And that was purely because I remember being a bit sort of like, it was a bit of a toss-up between doing drama or art for my A-level, and I went for drama because for a while in my teens I used to go to a theatre group, and I liked acting, but I stopped. I just didn't enjoy it anymore when I came to do it for A-level, and I always regretted not doing art. But I think by that point it would have been hard to go to art college. And I was good at English, I was good at writing and, interpreting texts and stuff, and I just wanted to come to London. I had a boyfriend in London. I just thought everything, I was so sort of, I think because I was the youngest of three as well, so I'd seen both my sisters go off to universities and, have that freedom and that you get when you leave home, and I felt so ready for it. I'd had a boyfriend in London since I was 16, so I'd already been coming up every weekend. And I remember just applying to London colleges, and I came and I went to Queen Mary College, which was in Mile End. And a lot of people warned me of this, but I didn't listen because I just wanted to come to London. But they said, look, there's not much of a campus thing in London. You might not find it's as a student as fun. But I just thought, well, I want to go to London anyway, so why waste 3 years in a different city and then I'd have to come to London? And they were right. There was absolutely no campus at all. No, there was nothing like that. And I didn't really make any friends, actually. Made one or two very superficial friends, but not people that I kept up with. And because back in those days, you had a grant, so there was some money towards like living accommodation. But I think it only just covered that, and I didn't have like financial support from my parents, so I got a job, and that was the job that I got in the electricity showrooms, this bar in Hoxton Square. It was all just kind of quite random, really, when I look back on it. But then I wonder, was it random? Was I in that area because I was kind of creatively minded, and a lot of those people that ended up in that area, you never quite know how much is coincidence or whether you've kind of subtly been steering yourself all along. But actually working in that bar and getting that job, and then because I had to have 5 shifts or something in order to make enough money to survive, I took on that many shifts, and I kind of practically lived there. So I'd eat there, I'd drink there. When I wasn't on my shifts, I'd stay there anyway because the drinks would be free or half price anyway. All my friends, I'd made friends with everyone working there, and it just felt, it was lovely. It felt like I was there for about 6 years, and well beyond when I graduated, and it felt like home. And so university wasn't really I didn't even go to pick up my certificate or go to the graduation or anything. I did graduate, but it sort of meant nothing to me. It was really a vehicle to get me to London, and I feel like the Shoreditch Electricity Showrooms was my university.
So didn't your parents get divorced while you were a student, is that right?
Yes, they did, yeah. So when my mum sort of left at the same time as me. I was the youngest of 3, and she moved out pretty much at the same time, and then they divorced shortly afterwards, yeah.
So did you get the sense that they were waiting for you to go?
Oh,
before?
yeah. Well, yes, that was definitely the case. My mum had, they hadn't had a happy marriage. They hadn't been happy. I'd never remember it being a happy marriage. And my mum had decided to just sort of stick it out until we all left home, I think, was her thinking. And so she did that, and then the family house then went up for sale. And so I remember when I was 19, actually driving, I'd often finish a shift at the bar at like 12 or 1 or something. I remember driving back to Little Compton, this village I grew up, in the middle of the night for some reason. I don't know why I did it in the middle of the night, but I did, to help my dad sort of sort the house out and break the house down. So I didn't have a family home from the age of 19 either. My mum was living in a very small rental at that point, and my dad then went and lived with a friend of his mum's for a bit, and he was sort of between homes. So yeah, that bar brought me up, really. Those people there were very significant in my life. I just think I wasn't really ready. I just wanted to be in the city, and I was excited to be with the people I wanted to be with, doing the things I wanted to do, and also just to some, one of my best friends died just before I left for London, and so that had happened, and then my parents split up, and I just wanted to leave it all behind and just like go and have fun. I think I didn't, and going to university, it was very much like you had to read 4 books a week, and I can't read 4 books a week. I mean, I love reading, but it completely put me off reading. They were thick books as well, and they weren't, they were kind of dense books that you then had to go and sit through 1 hour lecture on and write an essay, and then the next week you're onto another book. And I didn't like that way of learning at all. It really put me off reading for a while, because I suppose at school you're more used to studying a text in a bit more depth than that, and I felt like we were kind of just skimming the surface of things. I mean, these days if we had ChatGPT, I could just read a synopsis of the book and then I could go in with that, but I'd sort of like be skimming these books or trying to read a chapter and just hiding at the back of the lectures, really, because I didn't have enough to say on the subject. And it was a wasted opportunity, really. It's a shame, because I noticed that all of the older students, all of the mature students, they would be really engaged, asking questions, and I would be the same if I went back to university now, because you're much more ready to take that kind of thing in. But I wasn't. I was just not mature enough for it, I don't think.
But on the subject of there not being a campus, didn't you like live in a slightly random place with a bunch of punks?
Oh, that was just after. Was that? That was maybe just after I graduated, I think. No, I first moved into halls of residence in South Woodford, and I remember my mum dropping me off there. But we were trying to find it, and we got really lost, and I was in a really bad mood about the whole thing for some reason. I guess I was just a bit sort of nervous about it all and about meeting people. And I just remember really angrily, because she was saying, "Oh God, it's around here somewhere," and I pointed to like the ugliest building I could see, which was like this big kind of concrete high-rise overlooking the A12, and I went, "Yeah, it's probably in there." And she went, "Oh, don't be silly, darling. We'll find it." And we drove around for ages, and sure enough, it was in that bloody building, and I was like near the top of the building, and it was pretty grim. I mean, we'd have one really dirty bathroom to share between about 10 people on one floor. They weren't like they are now. I've seen the halls of residence they have now. They look amazing. There was one building on that little kind of, I think there was 3 of these towers, and we were all in one. We had one bedroom. It was really just like a cell. It had a sink, and that was it, and a bed, single bed. And even my mum was a bit sort of like, it took a lot to sort of, she was very tough, my mum, but she kind of walked in and put the bag. She was trying really hard to find something nice to say about it, I can tell, but she couldn't. So I hated that. And then there was one bar downstairs where people would go, but everyone was just going down and getting completely drunk and snogging each other. And I already had a boyfriend, and I felt a little bit more grown up, I think. And then I ended up moving into halls in town, which was a little bit better. But then I lived with friends. And yeah, I ended up with a group of punks. But that was, I think, 3 years on. And they were like ex-art school students too. And they were in it was a little house in Bayston Road in Stoke Newington. And God, I feel so. We were between 2 families with young kids, and now, like, having been that person with the young kids, I feel so bad. They were always knocking on our door and asking us to turn music down. It wasn't really me. I don't think it was these other guys. They were lovely. They were all lovely young men. I guess they were. They were like in their late 20s. I answered an ad in the Loot. There used to be a paper called the Loot. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but that's where people would look for flats, and it just advertised a room. And I turned out they were sort of interviewing people for this room, and they offered it to me. And the room was tiny, tiny, tiny. You could barely fit a single bed in it. And they lived in such squalor. My mum used to turn up to visit me with a bottle of bleach, because she just said she couldn't go to the loo, because it was disgusting. It was like black in that loo. And I guess it's just a rite of passage, isn't it, all of that stuff, learning how to look after yourself. And I remember that no one ever washed up. And I would have washed up, but the problem is, once you've got 5 layers of dirty plates, you just think, well, no, screw you, you do your own. I'm not going to do everyone else's. You're not going to do mine. So then they came up with this system where if people didn't wash up their own plates, you'd put them in their bed and then put the duvet on top of them. That was their solution. And there was this poor guy who was he was the landlord's son, and he used to come round practically in tears. His mum was the landlord, and she lived in Jamaica, and she was Jamaican, but she had lived in London, and she'd come back every now and then. And he was terrified of her, the son. And he'd come round to just sort of check the house before she came to do a little visit of it, and he'd just have his head in his hands, just like crying in the kitchen, saying, "Guys, you've got to do something about this place." It was funny, but I enjoyed it. It was a nice place. We had a lot of fun there.
So you talked about the bar in Shoreditch, and that sort of brought you up in some ways, but was that also the link to getting into the art world as well? How did the taxidermy thing come about?
I think it just sort of gave me the idea, because I was that I could do it, I suppose. I didn't know any artists really growing up, or very few. It wasn't really part of my world. My mum was always interested in art, and if she had, if she'd have the time, she would have taken us to galleries and things, but we didn't tend to have that much time. We didn't go on many holidays. But she used to, if we were in a local, in the city, she would try and find an art gallery to take us to, but it wasn't a big part of our life. And so I just don't think it had really occurred to me that it was something that I could ever do professionally. And then suddenly being somewhere where almost everyone around you is doing it professionally, either photographers or painters or running galleries or something. It's just, you start to realize that anything is possible. And I did do a little photography course at some point, like a short course, and I took a few photos, and I was sort of exploring lots of different mediums. But everywhere I looked, there was people already doing those things very well. There was like Nick Waplington and Jürgen Teller and all of these people kind of hanging out at the bar, and you just sort of think, well, you don't want to, what more can I add to that at the moment when all these people are doing these great things? And then there's painters, there was very successful painters, there was, everywhere, all the corners seemed to have been, like all of the markets seemed to have been cornered in all the various disciplines. And it wasn't like I cynically sat down and thought, now what can I do that no one else has done? But I think it definitely appealed to me that I was looking for some taxidermy for basically what happened is I was promoted to bar manager, and then the original owners had to sell, and everyone was leaving, but the new owners really wanted to keep me on because they saw me as a link between the old place and the new place. And they were just very corporate. They owned some places in Knightsbridge. They came and completely trashed the place and ruined it. It was awful. They took out they had great chefs there, all gone. They just started putting in like fried spring rolls, and it was awful what they did, but I didn't know that was coming. And they offered me the flat above the bar, the whole flat for free, as like a little perk if I stayed on. And I was living in this is when I was living with the punks, I think, in a tiny little room, and suddenly I'd never had any space like that before. So I moved in and I had nothing in this flat. It was huge. It was 2 floors, big open plan, really great flat. Still like a great flat, even now if I think back to it. By my new standards, it was a great flat. And I had nothing. I just had no stuff to put in it. I remember it was empty and looking around thinking like, I need to decorate it somehow. But I didn't really have money. I had a very small salary and a big flat. And I remember saying to somebody that I wanted to have some taxidermy there. I said, I kind of want the birds to look dead on the windowsill, like they've just kind of died there, because I just think, I don't know why, it's just what I wanted. In fact, I do think I know why. And I think everyone used to mistake that for me being a bit goth or like a bit macabre, and actually it wasn't that. I think it's just that taxidermy is a lot more convincing when the animal looks dead, because you're not expecting it to move. Whereas if you see it taxidermy bird mid-flight, it's clearly not flying. If you see it perched on a little branch, you know that it's not really, well, maybe for a second you're tricked, but not for long. And I think the idea of just having this, I used to want to keep dead birds when I found them as a child, and my mum would explain gently that I'd have to bury them and they were going to rot, and this was a way of keeping them and having these beautiful creatures just around. It was like a little connection to nature, I suppose. But I don't think I really understood that at the time, and everyone just thought it was a bit odd. But anyway, my friend said, well, you should just commission a taxidermist to do that for you. And I said, well, I don't think I could afford that, could I? And I started looking into it, and I couldn't afford it. But I found this taxidermy teacher. Well, he was a taxidermist in Scotland, and he offered lessons, but he didn't used to do many lessons. And I just phoned him up one day, and I asked him, and it was really simple. He just said, yeah, of course. And he lived just outside Edinburgh on this estuary in an old tower. It was all very magical looking. And my friend was at university in Edinburgh, so I used to go and crash on her floor. And I had a 1-day lesson with him where I did a very, very rushed pigeon. But he wouldn't let me make it look dead, because he said that you have to learn how to make them look alive, and then you can kind of deconstruct afterwards, which was good advice. Well, I was a bit disappointed to come back with a live-looking pigeon, but it was lovely, mostly because he did it. He did almost all of it, but I felt like I knew the basics, and then I would practice on my kitchen table in my lovely flat, and I would send him pictures of things that I would do, and we'd just talk on the phone. He'd kind of explain to me where it might have gone wrong, and then I used to go back and visit him. And I don't know, I think it was just everyone was really interested in what I was doing suddenly. It was really nice. I was really interested in it. It was a perfect marriage of art and science, and the science that really engaged me, because I could see, and it was so tactile, and you can feel the bones and you can understand the way they connect together. And I couldn't even now name all the different parts of a skeleton, but I know where they are, and I know the lengths and how they fit together. And, you know, if I'm stroking an animal, I know exactly what it looks like underneath the skin at that point. And that was all really interesting to me. And everyone responded really positively to it, all of the people that I was hanging out with. And people said, I want to see what you're doing, you know. And co-manager of my bar went to set up a bar called Bistro Tech, and he said, come and do some work in Bistro Tech. We've got these domes. Come and put some works in there. We'll have a little party for you. And it was lovely. It was just a sort of, it felt like the right thing at the right time. And yeah, it was a catalyst.
I love this idea that you're, you know, by day you're kind of deconstructing pigeons upstairs, and then by night you're coming down to the bar and running it as a manager. It's such an interesting sort of formative
my
experience.
Customers would come and bring me dead birds and things, you know. Everyone,
Really?
It became wide, yeah, because you have to, I didn't want to kill anything. I don't think it's even legal to kill stuff for taxidermy, but I'd have to put the word out that I was looking for things, and it was quite hard to find things in the beginning. So yeah, I'd start sort of get these little offerings from people, or phone calls at 10 o'clock at night saying they just found a mouse somewhere.
So you are not a trained artist, yet you found yourself in the art world. Did you feel like an outsider? I mean, do you even accept that now? How do you feel like you fit into the art world?
I don't think I do, really. I do think I'm an outsider. And the thing is, I didn't really care to start with at all, because I came at it so kind of obliquely. I hadn't been a plan of mine. And I realised how kind of like privileged this sounds, I guess. But I wasn't, right at the beginning, I wasn't trying to be an artist. I wasn't impressed particularly by these artists that came to the bar, because I didn't know who half of them were. So they were just customers. And then some of them became my friends. Some of them I thought were horrible. But it was only later that I then started, in a way, like the more I learned, the harder it became to be an artist in a way, because the more kind of humbling it was. And I do remember being, at the beginning, just coasting and thinking, this is great, yeah, I'll just make something and they like it and I'll show it. And then suddenly someone would buy it, and it all felt very kind of quite easy. And I did feel a bit bad about that, because I also had friends I'd made who were really struggling to be artists, and they weren't getting exhibitions and they weren't selling things. And I must have been really annoying to them. But then I remember being in an exhibition, I think it might have been the Pallant House in Chichester. It was like a proper sort of museum, and just suddenly realising, you know, there were some really serious artists there that I was showing amongst. And I just suddenly thought, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. I'm not good enough for any of this. And like, you know, I started to learn more about these people and about art generally. And I felt really silly, and I felt like I was just a bit of a pretender, like I somehow kind of, what's that word you give people who don't think they're good enough?
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I don't think it was imposter syndrome, because I think I was an imposter, and I think I had coasted for a while. Like, I think I'd got away with quite a lot in the beginning. Got away with showing work that wasn't really probably good enough, and it was all stuff that if I'd been at university, I would have gone into a crit and everyone would have demolished it, and I would have gone with my tail between my legs and made something a bit better next time. But no one did that. Everyone just kept saying, yeah, great, well, you know, we'll buy it, we'll show it. So then I had to kind of do it to myself, and then also like the market would do it to me suddenly. Like people would just stop buying. You know, the things changed a lot as I got older. I had this big run in my 20s where people wanted to buy my work. People really wanted to know what I was making, and they wanted to show it, and they bought it. And I made enough money, because I didn't have any input from my parents financially, and I suddenly found myself in a position where I could put a deposit down on a house, which was just extraordinary. And yet, at the time, I sort of thought, well, that's great, I'll buy a house. I really always wanted that sort of security for myself. And I remember having this, no one would give me a mortgage, because I'm an artist, and, you know, there's too big a fluctuation in your income. And I remember the only people who would give me a mortgage were Coutts Bank, because they give mortgages to artists and sports people and people with kind of like more interesting, less predictable careers. And I remember I had to have a meeting with the bank manager at Coutts Bank, and it was in a little private room, and we had like a 3-course meal. And I remember him saying to me, you know, do you think these earnings that you've made over the last few years, projecting forward, do you think you'll continue to earn like that? And I was like, definitely, absolutely, yes, of course I will, yeah, and I won't have any problem meeting the payments. And I kind of believed it, I think. And I remember saying to my mum, you know, I was buying this house that was like really expensive, and for her it was really expensive. and that I had a 500 grand mortgage. And I remember her being quite kind of like saying, "Are you sure about this?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's fine. It's gonna be all right." And of course, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't fine, and everything I was kind of like at the peak at that moment, and of course, people stopped buying the work, and I couldn't afford to continue living there. But at the same time, I could afford to hang on to it by moving out and renting it out and so on. And I think it was definitely the best decision I ever made. But I do look back on that person sometimes and think, God, you just had no idea.
Well, it's kind of the ignorance of youth.
It is. It's amazing, but it's such a sort of superpower in a way, because you just charge through all these incredible opportunities, thinking, fine, yeah, I'll deal with all of that when it happens.
Yeah.
And you do deal with it when it happens. But I don't think the person I am now would ever have done that, of like speculated on that house and that kind of a mortgage.
Yeah, it was a good thing to do.
It was.
Ultimately.
It was a great thing to do. It's the best thing I ever did.
So let's talk about this place. So we're in Camberwell.
Yep.
You can probably hear the buses roaring away in the background. So this was a pub. What was it like when you got here? Was it actually a pub when you bought it?
No, it had been run for, I think, 7 or 8 years as a location for shoots for like stills, films, TV, that kind of thing.
So no one was actually living here?
I don't think anyone was living here. I think people had sort of crashed here. It didn't look particularly lived in. No, it was pretty run down. But it had been a pub before that. So I think they'd bought it as a pub.
Okay.
And I think because actually my husband he went to Goldsmiths years ago, and he drank here when he was at Goldsmiths. So it had been a sort of popular, quite long-running South London pub. Yeah.
So your husband, Matt Collishaw, is an artist as well. How long have you been together, and how did you get together?
We've been together 17 years, I think, now.
Okay.
And we'd known each other for a long time. I remember I first met him when I was 19 and working at the electricity showrooms. I knew his brother better. Both his brothers used to drink there a lot, and he used to drink there too. He used to go out with Tracy Emin at that time, and they would often, I just remember they would always turn up at closing time, and we would always there'd be this collective eye roll as they'd all turn up just as they were friends with the owner, and everyone would be like,
so I go home.
And yes. And no one really argued with Tracy, so she would sort of come in drunk and say she wanted wine, and you'd just like look at the owner thinking, and he'd go, "Yeah, just give her wine." So we'd then have to sort of stay on and like entertain them. So I just remember thinking he was a bit of a pain, and he was, I only ever saw him when he was drunk at like 2 a.m. really, and his brothers were probably even worse. They were always they'd turn up more regularly than him, also at closing time. But with one of his brothers, Andy, was very fun, and he was very good friends with the owner, and he was a bit of a kind of like East London fixture. So I knew Matt, but not terribly well, just to sort of say hi to. It might have been when I left the bar I got to know him a bit better, and then I was working as an artist, so I did actually. Our work, there's quite a lot of sort of like common ground and themes and things, and I think I was in a show with him at the Haunch of Venison, and we just had a lot of the same group of friends. We ended up hanging out together a lot, and then he was in a very brief marriage, and I just split up I was briefly engaged to someone, and then we got together after that, but not till I was 27 or 8, I think. So, I'd known him for a good 9 years or something.
So did you buy this place together?
Well, not technically, no. I bought the place in Hackney that I just mentioned, and he bought this place. So at the same time, we found ourselves. So Matt, he's a well-known artist, and he's part of a group of well-known artists. But of all of them, he didn't financially do as well as a lot. His better-known contemporaries like Damien and Tracy and Sarah Lucas all went on to these kind of great riches. And Matt had a son when he was 23 from a very sort of brief relationship, and he ended up spending a lot of time looking after a baby, I think, while they were kind of out doing their work and, being out and about, I guess. And so I don't know if it was that. He says it might be something to do with that, but I don't know. I also think his work's quite sort of a bit more, it's quite cerebral, Matt. I think it takes a while to sort of he reads a hell of a lot of books. He really does these deep dives into subjects. And I think he's a kind of artist that he's just kind of got better with age. Like the more work he makes, the more sense you can make of all of the work that came before. And I think maybe some people originally thought his first works were just intentionally shocking, which is definitely something that he would never have wanted to do. So his was a kind of more of a slow build, his career, and he'd never bought anywhere before. And suddenly we both found ourselves in positions financially to buy somewhere, but we weren't, I was always very determined. He had just come out of a short marriage. He wasn't interested in marrying or anything. I never thought I wanted to get married, and I made that very clear. And I think because of the way my parents had lived and the way that my mum had sort of stayed in an unhappy marriage, for financial reasons, really. If she'd been independently wealthy, they would have split up a lot earlier and she would have bought a house. But I think that those things they can change the course of your life, how much money you have, whether you have your own property. And I was very determined to buy my own house. That was like my one goal, was just to sort of have that. And then once I had that, I would feel kind of safe. So we did that. We bought houses separately, and Matt found this, and he couldn't quite afford it, so he went in with a friend of his. But we found it together the girlfriend of his son found it on this website called Amazing Space, I think it was called, and she forwarded the link, and we all thought it looked great. So we all met here. I think she was there. She was here, Lauren, and Alex, Matt's son, who by this stage would have been 18, 19, something like that. And Matt and I, and we all met here, and we all just thought it was amazing because we'd never seen anywhere this big. We'd all been renting much smaller places, and Matt had always had a separate studio, and so it kind of felt like a joint purchase in many ways. But he lived here alone or with his friend, and I used to just come and stay at the weekends and live in my place for the first sort of 8 years or something. And then it was only when I got pregnant with our first son that I moved in.
So you were here how many years?
So we moved out when Clifford was 8, so I would have about 8 years, just a bit over 8.5 years, I think I was here.
Okay. So, I mean, I've never done a podcast like this before, and it's actually really fascinating, but you're in the process of moving out.
Yeah.
And so, you'll see from the film footage, like there's some stuff, but there's not all of your stuff, clearly. Yeah. What's that like for you? And how would you describe the experience of being here as a family for that period of time? Like, what does this place kind of mean to you?
I mean, it's funny. It means a lot on the one hand, and it's sort of profoundly important. And yet, on the other hand, I can quite easily let it go. And I'm not quite sure why or how that is. I suppose just because in life is a series of letting things go. It's a series of little losses, really. And also I think you spend a lot of your life accumulating things and people, and then slowly you start to, certainly in my case anyway, I've been really sort of decluttering, trying to get down to the very bare essentials. I remember Matt was describing it about people, actually. He said he was talking about coming back into London and running into someone in the street that he hadn't seen for ages and that he didn't particularly want to run into. And he said, it's funny, like you spend like the first half of your life trying to meet people, and then the second half of your life running away from them. And I thought, but that's kind of true also almost with stuff. I think I wanted to sort of accumulate these things for some reason, because I felt like they meant something to me, or they said something about me. And then you sort of realize that actually they don't, and none of those things are very important, and all that's important is the people in your life. So I'm taking my children with me. If I was leaving them here, it would be very different. And it has served us really, really beautifully in the years that we were here. It's I feel like we really, really rinsed it, like we really used this building, and that's what was really lovely about it. Like every room, lots of amazing things have happened in every room of the house.
God, tell us a couple of those memories.
Oh God. Well, I gave birth to my second son in one of the bedrooms, the only bedroom that's never actually been occupied by me.
That was accidental, wasn't it?
That was an accident, really, yes, because I think I'd never been one of these women who just planned on this lovely home birth. I felt very realistic about it, like I'm going to be in pain, I'm going to need medication. So for the first child, it was such a long labour anyway. It was over 30 hours. I got to hospital and they gave me the medication, and it happened. And the second one, in hindsight, I realised that the midwives were trying to sort of trick me into a home birth. They just kept trying to steer me in that direction, and I kept sort of keeping it open. They say, "What's your plan? What's this birth?" I've never understood the whole birth plan thing, because I thought, how can you plan for a birth? I don't know how long it's going to take or where I'm going to be when I go into labour. So I'd sort of say, well, we'll see. Maybe I live nice and near the hospital, so. And then I called them when my contractions started, and they just sort of said, "Oh, we'll get in the bath and we'll be with you really soon." And they just didn't come for ages. And I think they were about an hour and a half, and by that stage they'd said, well, it's too late to go anywhere. So I ended up having him at home, which was lovely in hindsight. I mean, it's hell at the time because you haven't got all the drugs that you had in the first time around. But it was lovely to have him here, and it was lovely to know that he was born here and to wake up with him in, you know, my own bed. And so I'm grateful to them for doing that. What else has happened here? I had my 40th birthday here, which was a really lovely big dinner downstairs and partying. I mean, everything's happened here. That's the thing. We've had so many, everyone in our lives has been through this building. And even those who are not in our lives, sometimes who come for, I don't know, a shoot. We rent it out for shoots sometimes. Every time they come, they say to us that they've been here before in the past because this building used to be used for a shoot. So, and every time I meet anyone out and about in London, if I say I'm from Camberwell, and then they say, oh, where? And I say, oh, this pub on Camberwell New Road. They all know. They say, oh, I always wonder what goes on in that building. We've made films here.
Like what?
Well, Matt made a film for this project that he was doing with this orchestra, where we had to sort of turn the ground floor into effectively like an old people's. It was a sort of series of scenes of people sort of old people passing away in bed, and so we had to dress the room differently, like 7 times. So we had this one sort of stock room that we built, and we would change that over. And I had to make for that film. He also had he recreated this thing called a sky burial, which is what they do in Tibet, where they put. The ground's too hard to bury people, so they carry up the bodies, or they dismember the bodies even sometimes to the top of the mountain, and the vultures carry them off.
Wow.
And he needed a skeleton, and he said, oh, you'll be good at that kind of thing, can you do that? So we bought a plastic skeleton, and then with my friend Robert, we had that splayed out on a table, and we were basically just making like red paper pulp, sort of like just making it look like bits of flesh and tissue on this skeleton. With my little son watching the whole thing. I remember he said he thought it looked like a flamingo. That's what I remember.
Sweet.
Very sweet. And we've rented it out for shoots as well. We had Baby Reindeer. Some of that was filmed here. And Black Doves that were on Netflix. They were filmed here, and countless other things.
It's such a good building, that's the thing. And that space downstairs particularly is so big and adaptable.
Yeah.
So down in the cellar is your studio, in inverted commas, or was your studio. I find that really interesting. Obviously, as an artist, you have to use space where you can find it, right? And you had the space and you did it, but you know, low ceilings, strip lighting, no natural light. What was that like for you working in that space?
It wasn't very efficient, you know. It was a bit grim, but I always put a positive spin on it. I'm quite a positive person on the whole. I'm very optimistic, and I tend to try and just see the best in everything. And it was either that or not work at all, I guess, when I had a baby or young children. And I felt really happy that I'd come from a much nicer studio in Hackney, but I genuinely felt very happy to have that space here and to sort of do something with it. The problem was there was just too much stuff in there, I think, because I put the studio into a basement that was already used a bit as storage, so I was kind of slotting in around space that was already filled. So there was just never enough kind of order, and it was never kind of clean enough. I could never find things, and I think really it was just an inefficient way of working, because I guess I just didn't really love being down there. I always wanted to come back up. I wanted to come back up into the light. I wanted to come back to my family. So I'd go down and I would just do what I had to do down there, and then come back up again. And if it had been a more pleasing space, I would have probably spent more time organising and tidying. And I'm happy to have a new studio where I moved into an empty building, and I managed to kind of build it from the ground up. So now I know where everything is, and it's just a lot more efficient. I get things done quicker.
So to give us a picture of that time, you would have been breastfeeding, raising children, and then putting them down to sleep, and then going down to the cellar and working. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
That's full on.
So yeah, there'd be a few hours or 20. I'd have a baby monitor down there with me, and I would run down. And it's tricky because I've realised that so much as an artist, I think you really, unless you're in the middle of something, you know exactly what you're doing, and you're doing the kind of like the grunt work where you're like repeating a task over and over again, which is quite rare. It's really hard to get anything done in these like half an hour bursts, because I'd go down there and it would take me just to like get my brain back in order and remember what I was doing and what I had been doing the last time I was down there, finding all of the right stuff. And then you'd hear this little like on the monitor, and I was like, oh God, I just have to go back upstairs again. So I don't think I did anything particularly great during that time, but it was still just having it there. It's good. It's a nice. It's a hard time for like women when that early stage when the babies are really young and you're like a machine and you're either just feeding or sleeping or changing nappies or that. And just to have that little space to go down and sit and think sometimes, and sometimes just to play with the materials, I think that was kind of enough for me for a while.
Mm, yeah. In terms of your work, it strikes me that there's this theme of sort of deception, right? In that you're using things like fingernail lacquers and, snake skins and manipulating those. Just tell us about that.
Well, I think it's kind of all of a continuum with taxidermy, because I don't do a lot of taxidermy now at all. And what I do is I make a lot of sculptures with snake scales or parts of snake bodies in, but they're cast from the body, and I don't use the skin anymore because the skin it's very rare for the skin to dry in such a way that it really looks exactly like a snake, I think. Because the thing is with taxidermy, you're very dependent on the feathers and the fur to kind of hide the skin as it dries. It dries like a shrink wrap, and it becomes kind of crispy dry. It looks dry, it looks parched, but the feathers and the fur cover that so you don't see it. But with a snake, obviously, it doesn't have that. So, and the whole thing about snakes is they've got this lovely kind of like incredibly smooth, shiny surface, and you don't really, you can sand them and you can put paint on them and you can varnish them and you can try your best to sort of recreate it. But I realized that no matter how good I got at recreating it, it was never better than actually just casting the body and painting directly onto the cast, which is what I now do. And I also started using the packaging in my work and sort of casting like polystyrene packaging that the objects come in, they're like these kind of quite very modern kind of fossils in a way, because you just see this cavity and you can't necessarily work out what was in it. And I didn't really see the link for a while between that and the taxidermy, but it is a very obvious link, because they're all sort of like a 3D trompe-l'oeil, really. Like the very fact that I wanted the birds to look dead in the beginning, it was because it was that kind of trickery. It was trying to hang on to something that you don't hang on to. And even like the objects that I cast and paint up, I sometimes use blocks of wood and things like that, and sometimes I'll cast and paint them up and they just look like wood, but they're not. And they would just be like a little lump of wood that I had lying on the floor, an offcut from something that I was using in the studio. And I like that idea of kind of commemorating that somehow and making that last, that tiny little incidental bit of wood or that little bird that was going to rot. And those polystyrene ends that, people just chuck into landfill that actually say a lot about us, not just personally, but as a kind of society, what we're buying, what we prize. Particularly during COVID, everyone was buying stuff and everything was all being delivered to the houses. And I imagined like in years to come, the landfill of these things and what those cavities would sort of the clues that like future archaeologists could get from our society from analysing those cavities.
And do you, in terms of your work, do you like living with it? Do you like having it around?
I do now, and that's a really nice and quite a new feeling. And I had a really long period of kind of artist's block, I suppose you'd call it, during my 30s. I think it was when I was sort of transitioning from a bit more traditional taxidermy to what I'm doing now. I couldn't quite. I was sort of feeling my way, and I just didn't. I thought it was normal to not like your work. I remember being in an exhibition I'd done in 2012, and it was a really well-attended opening, and everyone was asking me questions about the work, and things were selling, and I remember just feeling really hollow and awful and like a fraud, and like I didn't like anything in the room, and I just felt deeply embarrassed, and it was a horrible feeling, and I remember thinking I don't ever want to do that again. But then I couldn't quite work out why did I feel like that, and I kept saying to other artists, do you feel like this? And they would be like, no, not really. And I don't feel like that at all anymore. I think I was just a bit lost. I didn't quite know what I was saying or where I was going with any of it. And I'd fallen into this trap where I'd had a bit of early success. So the more kind of commercially driven galleries wanted me to do something. They didn't really care what I did. They just thought, just do something and we'll show it and hopefully we'll sell it. And when you're self-employed and when you've got a big mortgage to pay, you just say yes, and you think these opportunities might dry up if you don't say yes to them. And so I was on a bit of a treadmill of just making stuff. And I just go into the studio and I sort of think, like, what would Polly Morgan make? Because I didn't really feel like that person anymore, and I would just make something but not really love it. And now I've I really very consciously pulled back from all of that, and it was quite helpful having the kids, because I had another occupation and something that I could focus on during that time. And actually having them, I don't know whether it was them that kind of like did something. It was like the dam unblocked at that point, and I suddenly knew what I was doing and what I wanted to say. And since then, if I'm not proud of my work, if I don't want to live with my work, if I don't want to hang it on the work, then now I know that that's a sign that it hasn't worked, and I wouldn't exhibit it either.
Yeah. And certainly here, it looks like you've been living with a lot of other artists' work as well. So you've got a couple of behind you, a couple of quite big Damien Hirst pharmacy cabinets.
It's actually one, but it's in two parts, and we didn't
right.
quite have the height to do one over the other.
Okay,
so we
so
split them
deconstructed.
It's slightly deconstructed either side of the chimney breast, yeah.
And then you've got a Dinos Chapman piece above the fireplace. So do you sort of did you stop seeing them after a while? I mean...
I think with anything you do a little bit. I think that's why people have rehangs, isn't it? Because actually, if you just move stuff around, you notice it again. Yeah. And that's what's really nice about moving from here. So most of our stuff is now gone, and we are renting somewhere. It's a lovely, lovely place, but it's not ours. We're renting it, and at some point we will buy again in that area. But just like taking all of the things, there's a lot of things I took that I particularly love. Some of them have come back here to sort of furnish this place a little bit while it's for sale, but just putting them in a completely different environment is more of a kind of, it's like a Cotswolds stone. Yeah, it used to be a stable and kind of hayloft where we are now, and it's converted. It was, it's on this estate called Lippiat Park that was owned by the sculptor Lynn Chadwick, and he used to use it as his studio many years ago. So it's got these kind of now like big high ceilings and whitewashed walls and everything. But it's an old building, and it doesn't look, it looks very, the walls are kind of curvy, and the artwork looks so different there, and it really, really just refreshed it all in my mind. It was nice. I loved doing that, because you do start to see things afresh, I think, as soon as you change their environment. But
presumably most of the stuff that you've got has been swapped with other artists and things like that, right?
Yeah, it's mostly, they're either gifts or I've done a few swaps with other artists, and then I've been given things over the years. Matt's been given lots of stuff over the years. Yeah, we've never really been in a position to buy. I bought a little after my dad died. I remember I had like tiny bit of money came in, and I remember thinking, I don't want it. It was like 10 grand or something, and I remember thinking, I could just easily put this towards the mortgage payments, but I wanted to buy something solid with it. So I bought this little painting by Celia Hempton, which I still have and love, and that's actually in the new house. So I've never really bought anything for more than about £3,000 or £4,000. I bought that, and then I bought. That's about it, I think. Tiny little painting for about £600 from an American artist whose name I've forgotten. So no, we're lucky because we haven't had to. And honestly, even if we hadn't been given things by friends, we have our own work that we can put on the walls. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, neither of us have ever been in a position to be able to afford to buy our own work.
It's interesting.
You get that sometimes. You get collectors getting back in touch saying that they want to sell something and offering it to you first before we put it on auction. Would you like to buy it? I was like,
that's interesting.
No, I can't. No.
That's so interesting.
It's funny that they assume you can afford those prices.
Yeah. I did a podcast with Christopher LeBrun, and his wife Charlotte is also an artist, obviously, as well.
Are they around here up the road?
They not anymore.
Not anymore.
They're in Somerset now.
Okay.
But yeah, we sold to Inigo, their place down the road from here. Beautiful house. But they're obviously an artistic duo, slightly different generation to you. But what's it like being married to an artist, and how does it work between you in terms of the work? Do you show each other the work? Do you interact in that way, or do you kind of leave Matt to it and vice versa?
We work in different places. So we've got one cottage that we live in, and then there's this tiny little other one that we rent as a kind of, because it's a small cottage where we are. It's lovely big high ceilings downstairs, tiny little 2 bedrooms upstairs, and then we rent another little cottage which he has as an office and as a spare room. For if we've got family or friends staying. And then there's a bit of some garage space that I've turned into a workshop, because Matt's is very desk-based these days. A lot of the stuff he does is on computers, and he'll go off and work with people sort of out off-site, but when he's home working, he's at the computer. So we're in separate rooms, but we'll always have lunch and meals together, and we're involved in every little aspect of each other's work in some ways, but then we never... I don't know. I could come up with, and I have come up with Matt Collishaw artworks before, where I say, this, you should make this. This is something, you know, and he's actually gone ahead and made it. And I wouldn't for a second think of it as anything but his work, because it was him, and I was thinking like him, and I was thinking this is the step on from what you did before. And obviously I don't do this very often. I'm not trying to take credit for his work, but he knows the way that I work, and he would be able to suggest things to me all the time. And he's always suggesting sort of books or other artists to look at. And we go away and we get on with our own thing. We don't really come and we'll talk about titles sometimes. Sometimes he gets offered quite a lot to pitch for things, for public commissions or something like that. And he'll always send me the brief so that I can kind of think about it too, and then we'll discuss it over supper. And so a lot of the things that we've come up with are sort of a joint effort, but then we go off our separate ways to actually make them. But I don't know what it's like to not be with an artist, actually. I think even before Matt, the people that I dated were artists.
Why is that then?
Three. I don't know. It's just, there was a very sort of specific type I was always drawn to, and I don't know why, but I was. And actually their personalities were quite different, but they were all just quite sort of creative people. And Matt, of all of them, he's the one that I could settle with, because he's not got the kind of classic artist temperament, I suppose, where he's kind of chaotic or hot-headed or angry or anything. He's very, very calm and thorough and like steady. So those things make him a very good kind of parent and husband, and he's very kind of, he's very dependable in a way that maybe some of the other artists I went out with might not have been.
But would you describe yourself as dependable in that way as well?
I think so, yeah. But I think also maybe that's something to do with our maturity. I'm sure if I'd gone out with Matt in his 20s, he wouldn't have been like that. I feel like I probably had him at a good time of his life. I don't think, that he'd probably have a load of exes who, if they listened to this, would think, what? That's not the Matt that I knew.
You changed him.
But he's really, he's a very calm, easy presence. But all he really thinks about is his work. Outside of the family, everything's his work for him, and whatever book he's reading. But he's not someone, he wouldn't want to sit and talk about art. He can't bear it. Like if he goes out to dinner or something, he'll come back and he'll go, oh God, it was awful. They just wanted to talk about art all evening, and nothing I'm less interested in. And yet he is on a really sort of deep fundamental level, but then he just wants to talk shit to someone over dinner. He doesn't. So he's very sort of high and lowbrow. It's funny. It's a good mix. I think before I would go for people who are much more extreme and very different to me, and I think it's worked quite well going for someone similar to myself. And there's always this kind of like push and pull with us, like where one of us allows the other to kind of go off, and then the other one comes back. And we, like this week, like we just tag team trips to London. One of us arrives back from London, the other one will leave, because we've both got quite a few things on. But you have to be quite a selfless person for that, I think, and I think he is. Yeah.
I want to ask you about routines and rituals, because I think we all have these sort of rhythms that we go through during our day around the home. So how do you use your home in that kind of routine way?
I mean, the older I've got, the more I've become really dependent on routines. I find when I'm out of one now, it sometimes takes me a while to understand what's going on. I'll start thinking, I just don't feel I'm not sleeping very well. I feel a bit depressed. I don't, I'm suddenly really sort of like jumpy or anxious, and then it's always in a school holiday when the kids are home, and then the routine has been disrupted, and I've realised it's because those routines really, really ground me, and I am now a real creature of habit. But I think again that's an age thing probably, because I was a lot less so when I was younger. But yeah, I get up every morning at about the same time, at about 7. I have this lovely little analog espresso machine which makes the strongest ristrettos, and I just can't wait to get down and put the button on and put my little cup on top to warm it up. I have my cup of tea while the cup's warming up, and then I have my coffee. Everything's kind of punctuated around the like meals and drinks for me. I need to sort of like to know what I'm having for lunch, for supper that evening.
Do you make your own lunch?
Yeah. I mean, I make a lot of food, actually. I'm always making food for people. But I enjoy that. I find that it's kind of a creative thing, isn't it? Everything's kind of like clockwork, actually, with us now. And I think it's also helped that I've got rid of so many things. When we lived here, because we'd really been two households. I'd been living in Hackney, Matt had been here. blending together when I moved in, and then the children arrived, and people just give children so many things, and they end up with all of their stuff, and they're growing out things constantly, and so we just had so much stuff, and it all got on top of me, and thankfully, because we were planning to move, I spent the best part of a year. I was spending a lot of my time just sorting and giving things to people, giving things to charity, selling things online, throwing things away, and I think the fewer things you have, the fewer things are being asked of you.
Oh.
I remember reading that in the book about minimalism. Because I got almost obsessive about it, like I wanted to go down to practically nothing. And I read this very extreme book by this Japanese minimalist who really had nothing. He lived in a flat with, like, all he did was put on those 3D things to watch his TV, and then he had like a glass, a knife and a fork, or maybe chopsticks, and his glasses, and that was about it. And then this book was about sort of getting to that point, which was a little bit past the point I wanted to get to. But he said there was one thing in it which really stuck with me, and it was that everything you own is asking something of you. And so if you walk into a room and you've got hundreds of things, they're all saying, clean me, fix me, move me, find me, tidy me away, everything. And so that it's a stressful environment to be in when you've got all of these things asking something of you, and the fewer things you have, the fewer demands are being made of you. And I've now got to a point where I just have the bare minimum of everything, and now everything works like clockwork.
How interesting.
Yes, I'd recommend it.
That sounds amazing. So what are those few things? Like what's the most important thing in that grouping, apart from the coffee machine?
The coffee machine is crucial. Like a good bottle of like Pomerol or some sort of like nice Medoc, really expensive wine, because I don't drink much at all anymore, but if I do, it has to be really, really good. Just a few cupboards where the clothes go. I've made everyone's got their own few drawers. I know exactly where all of that stuff goes. The kids have got one kind of like sideboard thing and cupboard for their toys. They will go in there. I don't know, everything's got a place. I think that's the main thing. But
if it gets out of control and there's too much stuff everywhere, how does that feel to you? Can you not?
I just feel out of control. I feel really out of control, and because I am, and I'm looking for stuff. I realise I spent so much time in this house looking for things, particularly in the basement, and because it's on 4 floors as well. You leave something upstairs and then you're in the basement when you need it, and I really needed to change that. So just, my workshop, I inherited a lot of my dad's tools when he died. Matt had a load of his own tools. I had a load of my own tools. So we had sort of 4 or 5 of the same saws. We had I think 4 angle grinders and 4 jigsaws but we kept all of them. So I had to so now we've got one of all of those things, and I know exactly where they're all kept, and it just makes for a much simpler, more efficient life, and you just feel a lot less stressed.
Yeah. Are you someone that, do you get anxious? Do you get depressed? Do you have your kind of down moments? How does it manifest itself for you when you have a difficult time, I suppose, is the question.
I don't think I do naturally. I think I'm a very optimistic person. I think I'm quite fortunate like that. But one of the reasons I'm leaving London was because a couple of years ago, my sister very abruptly died after 6 weeks after being diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, wow.
And that just changed everything. I mean, everything, all of this stuff about getting rid of things and the minimalism, that's all the result of that. Everything is. And that did make me highly, highly, highly anxious throughout that period and way beyond it. And that was sort of manifested more in like intolerance to noise and crowds. And I felt like I was under attack all the time. Someone slammed a door, I would just like burst into tears or sort of like cower on the floor, and I'd never experienced anything like that before, so it wasn't it was a very good insight for me into friends of mine who have experienced things like that, because I'd never really understood it properly until then. And it's got a lot better, but I have a heightened sensitivity to noise now. I bought these, someone recommended these earplug things that you can put in that just sort of, they're a bit like just doing that with your ears, and they just dampen the noise a lot, because having like a couple of young boys crashing around the house as well, there comes a point sometimes where I feel like I'm being physically attacked by it. So I do get that, and I think the being in nature I had to get out of the city. I just couldn't, like these buses that I'd ignored them for years. Suddenly I was terrified of them. I'd have a panic attack on the street with the children, and I'd have to call Matt. He'd have to come and literally take the kids off me because a bus would go by really suddenly like that and terrify me. So I'm sure all of those things will get better, and they have got better, and maybe it'll go away altogether. But still, I think I suddenly realised it was more like a clarity, I think, a clarity of how unnatural it was to live like this. And I realised what was natural. I feel like I had this sort of epiphany about how to live, and that was with fewer things in the countryside. And then everything became kind of about the pursuit of that, really, at this point. So then there was a couple of years of just dismantling everything that we'd sort of built up, and now we're kind of rebuilding it elsewhere in a completely different shape.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I'm really sorry to hear about that. That's
Thank you.
What a tough time. I mean, it sounds like sort of hypervigilance in a way, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think that's probably what you would describe it as, yeah.
Yeah. Because that's major trauma, right? Have you had therapy there, or have you sought help for that, or?
I mean, I had a couple of sessions with a therapist immediately afterwards, but she said, I think it's a bit too soon because you're just grieving.
Yeah.
And I think she was right. I don't think I was just grieving. It was natural, everything I was going through. I don't know. Well, the thing is, it was all complicated. My mum then suddenly, completely out of the blue, died 9 months afterwards, which was also a complete shock. But she's older. She was 74, and it was just unexpected because she wasn't ill at all. And sort of the two things blended together, and then I don't know. I feel like I think you need time to process these things maybe before you get. I don't know if I need therapy. I don't really know. I think these things are natural, though, aren't they? It's all a natural response. So I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything unusual about my response to any of these things. So I'm not sure.
No,
I think if I was indulging in some destructive behaviours, but actually I feel like I'm like living in a more sort of positive and productive way than I ever have before, and I feel like I'm wasting less. I'm nicer to my friends and my family. I spend a lot less money. I want for far fewer things. I feel like I've really like distilled life to the essence, and I understand what's important. So I'm not sure if I need. I don't know. What do you think? Do I need therapy? It sounds like I'm kind of coping all right.
It does. No, I'm sure you are coping. I'm sure you are coping really well. That's a really, really big series of life events. I mean, I don't want to compare this directly, but I think it's interesting in the context of what you said. So my wife, Faye, was at the train station a few months ago, and the guy next to her threw himself in front of the train as it came through.
God.
And he kind of landed back on the platform next to her, dead. And that is obviously a traumatic experience. And so she was referred to a trauma therapist. And actually, it's been really quite profound for her. And she's done something called EMDR. Oh,
well, I have, yeah. I was recommended that by a few people, and I would be quite interested in that.
She says it's absolutely brilliant.
Helped, really?
And I'm not quite sure how it works.
It's the eye movement thing, isn't it?
It's the eye movement thing. And then she does something, I think, where she holds something in her hands, and there's something about, I don't know, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think maybe it pulses or something like that. But it's essentially sort of like getting you to talk through your experiences whilst also somatically getting your body to deal with at the same time. I've done something called somatic experiencing, which is basically quite similar, where you basically talk through difficult events, and then the therapist effectively kind of moves your body around at the same time. So it's kind of getting it almost to loosen up physically. It's really interesting, but it does work.
Well, because when you talk about these things, you normally would tense up.
You do. It actually, there's an amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score.
I've read that book.
Bessel van der Kolk.
Yeah, I've read it.
And Bessel van der Kolk basically says you hold everything physically, you hold it in your body. And I think, well, you know better than anyone, having handled so many animals over the years, but it's, you know, I almost think we do.
Feel, yeah, no, you can feel it. It can make you ill, definitely. I think all of those things, they can, and you have physical pains. I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm sort of through the worst of it. I wouldn't discount doing that, but then I feel like sometimes I do think I'm quite lucky to have a brain that seems to know what's best for me in these times.
Yeah.
I feel like I was kind of on autopilot, and I didn't feel conscious. I don't really feel like I've consciously made many decisions over the last few years, but I've been completely guided by something that's shown me exactly what the right things to do are, and they all seem to be working. So
Well, you're a natural optimist as well, as you said,
Yeah.
which is a really good default position. But I think the stuff around being sensitive to sound is fascinating, because I found as well, the people that I know, and certainly my wife's experience as well, when you have children, that all turns up massively. I mean, we had the fights we had over the volume on the TV when our children were young. It's so interesting, because I think as a young mum, you just experience everything turned up to 11.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
hypervigilance.
and you are
again.
hyper, yeah, because particularly when you've been breastfeeding and thing, I think at night you get used to, I remember I'd wake up, it felt like a bird, or the foxes outside, anything would just wake you up and you'd assume that your baby needed you. And
Yeah.
I think it starts then, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's you're tuned into everything. So yes, I think living in a city can be really, really, these tiny little sort of micro stresses, just hearing things going by all the time, you're kind of,
Yeah, exactly.
it's like you're being woken up or something constantly.
Yeah. I've got a book coming out soon called Homing, and I've got a whole chapter about acoustics. I basically the things you can do within your home environment to essentially mediate that.
We need that in our place, but I'll have to because we've got tiled floor and the acoustics are terrible in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
We've put in the odd rug and soft furnishings, and it's probably helped it a little bit, but yeah, it's quite jarring sometimes.
So before we bring this to a close, I'd just love to just talk to you about the countryside then. So you've kind of gone full circle back to the Cotswolds.
Yeah, different area, different
Stroud.
part of it, much sort of further west than where I grew up. But
Much further west. So I interviewed Mary Portas on the
she's
podcast.
just round the corner, I
was
believe.
going to say,
yes.
she must be nearby, right?
She is. I think I know where she lives.
Okay.
Our friend who we rent from has this pub called the Woolpack, and she is in the Woolpack quite a few times.
I mean, everyone talks about the Woolpack, but I've never been to the Woolpack.
It's amazing, and he's just opened a new restaurant up in Stroud called Juliet, named after his wife, and it's even better. It's getting amazing reviews.
Okay.
Yeah, so thankfully, I don't even have to come to London to eat anymore.
But that's a big thing, right? That's a really big thing, because you think if you move out of London, you're not going to have that cultural stimulation in the same way. But have you found that, or has it been okay?
No, I haven't found it at all, because I have more cultural stimulation, because I'm one of those people who does that thing that everyone talks about when they leave London, which is you come back to London and you actually go and see a show, or you go and I will come to London and do stuff that I never did when I lived here, because I always felt when I was here, I should be here, I should be cooking, I should be down in the basement, I need to be here for the children. There was always a reason not to go into town to visit a show, unless we were doing it sometimes with the kids at the weekends. So we didn't never go to shows, but we went less and less the longer we lived here. And that's just been reversed instantly by leaving the city. So I come back and I'll do things, and it's really nice. And I'll go to different parts of London, go to the places that I like rather than the ones I can afford to live. That's been quite a nice revelation. I go all over London to meet people now, places that I don't really know very well. Yeah. But no, in the countryside, there's plenty of that. I don't know. It's a different kind of culture, isn't it? I mean, our friends who I just mentioned with the restaurants, they have they're growing they've got this kind of biodynamic garden where they're growing all of the fruit and veg for the restaurants, and just watching all of that just on my periphery, I find that very inspiring and stimulating. And there's a lot of interesting people doing a lot of great things out there, and I think the problem with London can be a bit of a trap. You feel like there isn't anywhere else, and of course there is. It's just one place of millions. And I don't know, that I think that really hit me when Emily died for some reason. I did just thought oh my God, why am I still in London? There's a whole world out there. I just thought I can't just spend the rest of my life here. And years can just go by so quickly without you really noticing it, just because you're quite comfortable. And actually more and more and more, because there's been such an exodus of people over the years, it's becoming the norm to have galleries and event, all the things that you have in London out in the countryside. You just have to maybe get in the car to get to them instead.
How old are your kids now?
One's about to turn 7 and the other's 9.
Okay, so they're still young enough, right? So do you think they appreciate it, being out there?
They do, yeah. I mean, I didn't want to wait for them to be teenagers, because then they wouldn't have wanted to leave. And I think it's already dawning on the 9-year-old. He keeps saying, why are you selling that house? I quite liked it there, actually. I still quite like to go back sometimes.
Yeah.
And they'll be furious with us in a few years when we realise that we got rid of this place. They like being with you, kids. I think they're fine anywhere, as long as you're with them. But I can see that they're having a much better childhood there, partly just because we're all less stressed and more easygoing, and they're just outdoors all the time. And I think the major difference for me is that we were already starting to have kind of arguments about screens and stuff here, because when you get home in London, particularly if it's raining outside, it's a winter, and we were lucky in this place, it's massive. Most people live in small flats. When you get your kids home, it's really hard to sort of entertain them in that small space for very long, and inevitably they just want to go on the screen. And it's just completely solved that problem overnight. For now, I know it will come back, but there's so much, you just open the door and push them outside and they just find a stick and they'll just play with that for hours. So it's really, really good at the moment for them.
That's really nice.
I think they'll thank me for it one day, but it might take a while.
But they will, and I think in the way that you found it stimulated you creatively, it just does, I think. I mean, we live in the countryside as well, and I really identify with what you said about boredom and that simplicity of just actually you kind of have to just interact with the world around you, the natural world around you, because there's not really much else to do. I think that's really good for a child. Because
someone described, it might be Matt actually, was just talking about kids, like little toddlers, as soon as they start moving around, they're like little scientists. They're just testing the limits to everything. They're testing materials. They're dropping things on the floor. They're throwing them at the wall, stabbing themselves with them, whatever it is. And they've just got limitless materials out in the countryside to do that with. And I think you do just get a much better understanding of the world and of materials and of animals by being out there.
Yeah, material intelligence, as Glenn Adamson calls it. I really like that term. Last question. Always ask everyone this. What does the word home mean to you? You know, there's obviously the bricks and mortar of a building, but there's also a community. There's also the entire world. Like, what does that home word mean for you?
It's just family. I mean, it really... I was reading my kids When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. I've just finished it last night with them. You know, the Judith Kerr book.
I haven't read that one.
It's a lovely, lovely book. Very sad, sad, but mostly uplifting, actually. But there are sad moments in it. Anyway, she writes this little sort of epilogue at the end about having written the book. And she says that she wrote the book because when she grew up in England with English children who spoke English, she really wanted them to know about her experience as a refugee leaving Berlin and how she lived all over the place with her in tiny little flat in Paris, and like they'd stayed with friends, and you know, all their various journeys that got them finally to England. And she said her children would always respond and say, "Oh, Mummy, that must have been so hard for you." And she said, "But I wanted to write a book so that they could understand that it wasn't hard for me at all, that it was all a big adventure for me, and that all that mattered was that I was with my brother and with my parents, and I never felt like a refugee because they were always with me." And that just sort of struck home, because I think that's how I feel, really. As long as I can take those three along with me, I think I could make a nice home anywhere.
Brilliant answer.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Polly. Absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
I waffle on a bit, don't I? You'll have to edit that down.
It's a great waffle.